Claire Evans had a life most people would envy. A loving husband, a beautiful baby girl, and a warm home in Seattle filled with laughter and sunlight. Every morning she watched her husband, Matthew, feed their daughter Emma before leaving for work. He'd kiss Claire on the forehead and say, "My girls are my everything." And Claire would smile back, holding the weight of a secret that kept her awake at night 2 years ago. Before she met Matthew, her life had been very different. She was lost, nursing a broken heart after a painful breakup with Daniel, a man she once believed was her forever. Daniel had been passionate, spontaneous, and full of dreams. They had shared everything, including plans for a future that never came true. When he left suddenly for a job in another city, without goodbye or explanation, it shattered her. She waited for weeks, hoping he'd call, but silence was all she got. Eventually, she tried to move on. Months later, Matthew entered her life. He was gentle and grounded, the kind of man who fixed things instead of breaking them. He didn't rush her to fall in love. He simply showed up, helping when her car broke down, bringing her soup when she was sick, and listening when the world felt too heavy. Slowly, she began to trust again. And when he proposed a year later, she said yes, believing she could start over, but fate had other plans. Just before her wedding, Claire discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with both joy and fear. She knew the timing didn't make sense. It couldn't be Matthew's. But when she looked at the ring on her finger and remembered everything he'd done for her, she made a choice that would define her life. She told no one. Matthew was overjoyed when she told him they were expecting. He promised to be the best father in the world, and he kept that promise every single day. When Emma was born, his face lit up brighter than the hospital lights. He held her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Claire wanted to tell him the truth then, but when she saw the tears in his eyes, the words froze in her throat. Life moved quickly after that. Late nights, lullabies, and quiet family moments filled their days. Matthew worked long hours to provide for them, and Claire spent her days taking care of Emma, watching her grow, her curls forming just like Daniel's. Every time Claire saw those curls, her stomach twisted. But she convinced herself it didn't matter. Matthew was Emma's father in every way that counted. Still, guilt never fully left her. It showed up in small moments when Matthew proudly showed baby pictures to his coworkers, when Emma called him Dada for the first time, when neighbors said she had his smile. Claire would laugh, pretending it was true, but inside she'd feel a sharp ache. She had built her happiness on a lie. Sometimes at night, when the house was quiet and Emma was asleep, Claire would sit by the window and look out over the city lights. She'd wonder where Daniel was. Did he ever think of her? Did he ever wonder what had happened between them? And then she'd scold herself for even thinking about him. He had chosen to leave. Matthew had chosen to stay. But life has a strange way of circling back to the past. One rainy afternoon, Claire stopped by her favorite coffee shop while Matthew was at work and Emma was with her babysitter. The smell of roasted coffee beans and rain on the pavement filled the air. She was stirring sugar into her cup when she heard a voice behind her, deep, familiar, impossible. "Claire?" She froze. Her hand trembled and the spoon clinked against the cup. Slowly, she turned around. And there he was, Daniel. He looked older, more grounded, but his eyes were exactly the same. The same eyes that once made her believe in forever. For a second, neither of them spoke. The noise of the cafe faded away, leaving only the sound of her heartbeat. "Daniel," she said quietly, "it's been a long time." He gave a soft, stunned laugh. "Yeah, I didn't think I'd ever see you again." They sat down at a corner table, talking like strangers who knew too much about each other. He told her he'd come back to Seattle to start a new business. She told him about her marriage and her daughter, keeping her tone calm, controlled. When he asked to see a picture of Emma, she hesitated, but eventually showed him one on her phone. The moment he saw it, his smile faltered. His eyes widened slightly, searching her face for an answer she didn't want to give. Emma's photo stared. Back at them her soft brown curls, her dimpled smile, and the same hazel eyes Daniel had. "She's beautiful," he said finally, his voice low. "Thank you," Claire replied quickly, avoiding his gaze. "How old is she?" "Almost 2." His silence said everything. He didn't accuse her, didn't ask more. He just looked at her with quiet disbelief. Claire left the cafe feeling like she was walking through a storm, even though the rain had stopped. She got into her car and sat there for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, trying not to cry. The life she had built so carefully was trembling on the edge of collapse. When she reached home, Matthew was sitting on the living room floor, reading to Emma from her favorite picture book. The sound of his gentle voice filled the room, and Emma's tiny hands clapped with delight. He looked up and smiled at Claire, the kind of smile that could light up an entire world. "Hey," he said warmly. "You're home just in time. Emma wanted to show you her new dance." Claire smiled back, forcing her tears away. She knelt beside them, hugging her daughter tight, breathing in her baby scent. Matthew kissed her forehead, completely unaware of the storm behind her eyes. That night, as they tucked Emma into bed, Matthew whispered, "I can't believe how lucky we are. She's perfect." Claire looked at him, her throat tightening. "Yeah," she whispered. "She really is." But deep down, she knew luck had nothing to do with it. It was Lo Van Lys holding everything together. She went to bed that night beside the man who loved her unconditionally, knowing that the truth she had buried might not stay buried for long. Somewhere out there, Daniel now knew or at least suspected that Emma was his. And Claire knew her peaceful world could end with a single word from him. The secret she had guarded for 2 years was no longer safe. Claire tried to pretend everything was normal after seeing Daniel, but her heart wouldn't settle. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, the confusion, the realization, the quiet ache in his eyes when he saw Emma's photo. She told herself he wouldn't reach out again, that maybe he'd let it go. But deep down, she knew Daniel wasn't the kind of man to ignore the truth. 3 days later, her phone buzzed. It was him. The message was simple. "Can we talk?" She stared at the screen for a long time, unsure what to do. Finally, she replied, "I don't think that's a good idea." But that didn't stop him. The next day, he showed up outside her office. He looked nervous but determined. "Claire, please," he said, his voice low. "Just 5 minutes." She sighed, glancing around. "Not here." They walked to a small park nearby, where autumn leaves covered the grass. Daniel shoved his hands into his pockets, searching for the right words. "I don't want to make trouble for you," he began. "But when I saw that picture, I can't stop thinking about it." Claire's stomach twisted. "Daniel," he stepped closer, his voice trembling slightly. "She looks like me, Claire. The same eyes, the same smile. Please, just tell me the truth." She wanted to deny it, to walk away and pretend none of this was happening. But when she looked into his face, she saw the man she had once loved, the man who had never known what he left behind. "Daniel," she whispered, "you don't understand how complicated this is." "I understand enough," he said quietly. "I hurt you when I left. I regret that every day. But if that little girl is mine, I deserve to know her." Her eyes filled with tears. "You don't get to show up after 2 years and ask for that. You left me, Daniel. I had to move on. I built a family. I can't destroy it now." He looked down, silent for a long time. Then he nodded slowly. "You're right. But you can't hide the truth forever. One day she'll want to know who she really is." His words followed her home like a shadow. That night, when she opened the front door, the sight of Matthew playing with Emma nearly broke her. He was on the floor, pretending to be a monster, chasing her around as she squealed with laughter. Claire stood in the doorway, holding back tears. Matthew looked up and smiled warmly. "Hey, you're home early. Emma's been waiting to show you her new trick." Emma ran to her, holding a crayon drawing in her tiny hands. "Mommy, Daddy, look," she said proudly. Claire forced a smile. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." As they sat down for dinner, Matthew talked excitedly about his day at work. He mentioned a promotion he was being considered for, a bigger house, maybe another child someday. Claire nodded along, her mind miles away. Later that night, after Emma was asleep, Matthew turned to her in bed. "You've been quiet lately. Everything okay?" She hesitated. "Just tired," she said softly. He smiled gently and took her hand. I was thinking, when Emma's a little older, maybe we could take a trip. Somewhere peaceful. Just us three." Her heart squeezed. He had no idea the ground beneath their life was beginning to crack. She turned away so he wouldn't see her tears. The next morning, as she dropped Emma off at daycare, her phone rang again. Daniel. She didn't answer. But when she picked Emma up that evening, he was there, waiting by his car. "Daniel," she whispered sharply, "you can't keep doing this." "I just want to see her," he said. His voice wasn't angry, just filled with longing. "Once, please." "Absolutely not," Claire said, glancing nervously toward the daycare door. "If Matthew finds out I'm not here to ruin your life," Daniel said. "But she's my daughter, Claire. You can't erase that." She felt her throat tighten. "I'm not trying to erase anything. I'm just trying to protect her from me." He asked quietly. She had no answer. That night, Claire couldn't eat. She sat on the couch while Matthew fed Emma her dinner. The two of them laughed over spilled applesauce, and the sound made her chest ache. Every moment with them felt like a ticking clock, counting down to the truth she could no longer control. After putting Emma to bed, a few came back to the living room and sat beside her. "You've been somewhere else lately," he said gently. "If something's wrong, you can tell me." She looked at him, the man who had loved her without hesitation, the man who had built a life on trust. "Matt," she began softly, "what if? What if something from my past came back?" He smiled faintly. "Everyone has a past. It's who we are now that matters." His kindness only made her guilt heavier. She nodded, whispering, "You're right." But inside, she was breaking. Over the next week, Daniel kept his distance, but his presence lingered in her thoughts. She avoided places he might be, yet part of her knew it was only a matter of time before their paths crossed again. Then, one Saturday afternoon, it happened. She and Matthew took Emma to the park. The sun was bright and laughter filled the air. While Matthew pushed Emma on the swing, Claire went to buy ice cream. When she turned around, her heart stopped. Daniel was there. He didn't approach. He just stood across the park, watching quietly. His expression was full of pain and pride, like a man seeing something both beautiful and unreachable. For a moment, their eyes met. Claire felt her breath catch. Matthew walked up behind her, carrying Emma in his arms. "Who's that?" he asked casually, noticing her frozen stare. She blinked quickly, forcing a smile. "No one. Just thought I saw someone I knew." Matthew nodded, turning his attention back to Emma. But Claire's heart was pounding. She knew Daniel had seen everything, the way Matthew lifted Emma, the way Emma laughed and called him Daddy. That night, she found a letter slipped under her car windshield. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. It was from Daniel. "Claire, I'm not trying to take anything away from you. I just need to know her, even from afar. I can't pretend she doesn't exist. You have a beautiful life. I'm not here to destroy it. But please, don't shut me out completely." Claire read the words over and over, tears dripping onto the paper. She wanted to protect everyone, Matthew, Emma, even Daniel, but the truth was no longer silent. It was alive, waiting to be faced as she stood in the dim light of the kitchen. Clutching that letter, she realized her secret was no longer hers alone. Someone else now held a piece of it, and soon, whether she liked it or not. Everything she had built could fall apart. The past had finally caught up with her hand this time. It wasn't leaving quietly. The days after Daniel's letter were the hardest of Claire's life. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't even look Matthew in the eye without feeling like she was standing on borrowed time. Every word Daniel had written replayed in her mind. "I'm not here to destroy your life. I just need to know her." It was kind, but it was still a threat to everything she had built. Matthew noticed the change in her. "You've been distant," he said one night while they cleaned up after dinner. His tone wasn't accusing, just worried. "Is something wrong?" Claire forced a smile. "No, just tired." But he didn't believe her. He stepped closer and touched her shoulder. "Claire, talk to me, please." She almost told him right then. The truth burned at her throat, begging to come out. But then Emma's laughter filled the hallway as she played with her toys, and Claire froze. How could she tear apart their happiness? Matthew adored that little girl. He loved her without question, without doubt. Telling him now would break him and break their family. That night she lay awake long after Matthew fell asleep. She stared at the ceiling, her heart pounding. She knew she couldn't keep running from this. So the next day she texted Daniel, "We need to talk." But not near my home. They met at a quiet park outside the city, far from familiar faces. When Daniel arrived, his expression was calm but heavy. "Thank you for coming," he said softly. Claire crossed her arms. "This has to stop, Daniel. You showing up, the message is too much. I can't live like this. I don't want to make it harder for you," he replied. "But I can't just walk away knowing my daughter is out there. I'm not asking to take her away, Claire. I just want to know her, even if it's from a distance." She closed her eyes, tears threatening. She already has a father. Matthew loves her more than anything. He's the only dad she's ever known. If you come into her life, it will confuse her. It will break everything. Daniel's voice cracked. "But isn't the truth better than a lie?" She shook her head. "Not always." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The wind moved softly through the trees. Finally, Daniel sighed. "Does he know?" "No," Claire whispered. "You have to tell him, Claire." "Can't," she said quickly. "He'll never forgive me." Daniel looked at her with quiet pain. "Maybe, but he deserves to know. And Emma deserves to know who she is." Claire drove home feeling like she was carrying 100 pounds on her chest. When she pulled into the driveway, Matthew was outside holding Emma's hand as they watered the plants. Emma waved. "Mommy?" Claire smiled weakly and waved back, but her vision blurred. The scene was too perfect, too fragile. Later that evening, while Matthew bathed Emma, Claire stood by the window, her phone in her hand, Daniel's last words echoing in her head. "He deserves to know." She typed a message to Daniel. "Please don't do anything. Give me time." Then she deleted it before sending dot when Matthew came out of Emma's room after putting her to sleep. He found Claire staring blankly at the floor. "You sure you're okay?" he asked again. She hesitated. "Matt, if I ever did something that hurt you, would you still love me?" His brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "Just in general," she whispered. He smiled softly, thinking she was just tired. "Claire, love isn't about being perfect. It's about choosing each other, even when it's hard." His words broke her completely. She nodded, tears falling silently as he pulled her into his arms. He didn't understand why she was crying, but he held her tighter. The next morning, while Matthew was at work, Claire received a call from Daniel. His voice was shaky. "I saw you last night at the park with Emma. She looks happy." Her heart raced. "Daniel, you can't keep following us." "I'm sorry," he interrupted. "I just needed to see her one more time." "But Claire, this is eating you alive. You need to tell him. Because if you don't, I might have to." Claire's breath caught. "You wouldn't?" "I don't want to," he said softly. "But I can't live with this secret anymore." She hung up and sat on the floor, trembling. Her secret wasn't safe anymore, not even with Daniel. That evening, Matthew came home early. He looked exhausted but cheerful. "Guess what?" he said, holding a small envelope. "The promotion came through. We can finally move into that bigger place we talked about." Claire tried to smile, but she couldn't. The joy in his eyes was like a knife twisting in her chest. "That's amazing," she whispered. He noticed her expression and frowned. "Claire, please. I can tell something's wrong. Just tell me what it is." Before she could answer, the doorbell rang. Her heart stopped. When she opened the door, Daniel stood there. Matthew appeared behind her, confused. "Who's this?" he asked. Claire froze. Words failed her. Daniel looked from her to Matthew, guilt all over his face. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to show up like this." Matthew frowned. "Do I know you?" Daniel hesitated. "No, but I know your wife." Matthew's eyes shifted toward Claire. "Claire, what's going on?" Her throat went dry. "Matt, please, let's not do this right now. Tell him," Daniel said softly. "Daniel, stop," she begged. Matthew's expression hardened. "Tell me what?" Claire felt her knees weaken. Her voice trembled. "Matt, Emma isn't your biological daughter." Silence. The kind that feels like it could shatter the world. Matthew blinked slowly, his face pale. "What?" Claire tried to speak, but no sound came. Tears streamed down her face. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to lie. I was scared. I thought I'd lose you." Matthew stepped back, his voice barely a whisper. "Who's the father?" Daniel looked down. "I am." Matthew stared at him, then at Claire. Disbelief etched across his face. "All this time, you let me believe she was mine." Claire sobbed. "You are her father, in every way that matters." Matthew turned away, running a hand through his hair. He looked shattered, like a man whose entire world had been rewritten in a single moment. "I need to think," said finally, his voice breaking. He grabbed his coat and walked out the door. Claire collapsed to the floor, sobbing into her hands. Daniel tried to comfort her, but she pushed him away. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. "You ruined everything." He shook his head sadly. "It wasn't me, Claire. It was the secret." That night, she sat by Emma's crib, watching her daughter sleep peacefully. The house was too quiet. Matthew didn't come home. As the moonlight spilled through the window, Claire whispered through her tears, "I've lost everything." But deep inside, a small voice told her that maybe, just maybe, the truth was the only way any of them could ever start to heal. Still, she knew nothing would ever be the same again. The night Matthew left, the house felt emptier than it ever had. Claire sat on the couch, holding a sleeping Emma in her arms, staring at the front door that didn't open again. She had no idea where he went or if he would ever come back. Every sound in the house echoed: the clock ticking, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the soft breaths of her daughter. Everything felt wrong. She didn't sleep. Her mind replayed every moment of their life together, the day they met, his gentle proposal, the nights he sang to Emma, the way he smiled when he said he was the luckiest man alive. And now that man was gone because of her truth. When the morning sun crept through the window, she finally heard the sound of the door. Matthew walked in slowly. His eyes were tired, his face pale. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there looking at her, holding Emma. Claire's voice shook. "Matt," he raised a hand gently. "I just needed time to breathe," he said quietly. "I drove around all night trying to make sense of everything." Claire's tears came instantly. "I never wanted to lie to you. I thought if I told you, I'd lose you. And I couldn't." Matthew walked closer, his voice low and strained. "I would have understood the truth. But lies, they don't heal, Claire." She nodded, sobbing. "You're right. I was a coward." He looked at Emma, sleeping peacefully in her crib, unaware of the chaos surrounding her. His expression softened. "You know what the hardest part is?" he said. "I look at her and I still feel the same. I can't turn off what I feel." Claire wiped her face. "Because you're her father," she whispered. "You've always been." Matthew sighed deeply, sitting beside her. "When I found out, I thought it would change everything. But it didn't. When I held her this morning before I left, I realized she doesn't know anything about blood or secrets. All she knows is that I'm her dad." He turned to Claire. "That's what hurts the most. I still love both of you, but I don't know how to trust you again." Claire nodded. "I'll earn it back. I don't expect forgiveness, but I'll never stop trying." For a while, they sat in silence. The tension between them felt heavy. But there was also something else, a quiet love that refused to disappear. A week passed before things started to settle. Matthew didn't move out. He slept on the couch for a few nights, barely speaking, but he stayed. He still took Emma to the park, still made her breakfast. Claire watched him from a distance, heart aching with every small act of kindness. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived. It was from Daniel. He wrote that he didn't want to make things harder. He understood now that Emma already had a father, a good one. He said he would leave Seattle but wanted a chance to see Emma occasionally. When the time was right, Claire showed the letter to Matthew. He read it carefully, then folded it and handed it back. "Maybe that's fair," he said. "She deserves to know where she comes from. But she also deserves stability." Claire nodded. "I agree. I don't want to hide the truth anymore, but I want her to grow up safe, surrounded by love." Matthew looked at her for a long moment, then said softly, "We can do that. But it has to start with honesty." For the first time in weeks, Claire saw a small light in his eyes again. The months that followed weren't easy. There were awkward silences, moments when Matthew pulled away, nights when Claire cried quietly after he went to bed. But slowly, things began to heal. They went to counseling together, learning how to rebuild what had been broken. Matthew didn't forgive overnight, but his actions spoke louder than words. He stayed, he tried. When Emma turned 3, Daniel met her for the first time. They met at a quiet park, the same one where he and Claire had argued months earlier. Matthew came to standing beside Claire as Emma toddled toward the man she didn't know was her biological father. Daniel crouched down and smiled gently. "Hi, Emma," he said. "You like the swings?" She nodded shyly and pointed toward them. "Swings." Daniel laughed softly. "Let's go then." Claire watched them with mixed emotions, guilt, sadness, but also relief. Matthew's hand found hers, and she looked up at him, surprised. He didn't speak, but the small squeeze of his fingers said enough. After that day, Daniel kept his promise. He stayed in touch, but didn't interfere. He sent letters for birthdays, drawings, and little gifts, always respectful of Matthew's place as her father. Over time, the anger faded, replaced by understanding. Years passed quietly. One evening when Emma was 5, she climbed onto Matthew's lap while he read her a bedtime story. "Daddy," she said sleepily, "you're my favorite." Matthew smiled and kissed her forehead. "You're my favorite too, sweetheart." Claire stood at the doorway, watching them, tears forming again, but this time they were tears of peace. She remembered the day she thought she'd lose everything, the night she thought Matthew would never come back. Yet there they were, stronger, quieter, still standing. After Emma fell asleep, Claire joined him on the couch. "You're an incredible father," she said softly. He looked at her with a tired smile. "I don't know about incredible. I just love her." She nodded. "That's what makes you one." Matthew reached over and took her hand. "You know," he said, "I spent a long time thinking love was supposed to be perfect. But now I know it's not. It's about choosing someone every day, even when it hurts." Claire's eyes filled with tears again. "Do you still choose me?" she asked quietly. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I do, because love doesn't just disappear. It just changes shape." She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. For the first time in a long time, she felt safe. The truth had broken them, but honesty had also rebuilt something new, something stronger, more real. As the years went by, Emma grew up knowing the truth about her family in the gentlest way possible. She understood that she was lucky because she had 2 men who loved her deeply. Daniel, the man who gave her life, and Matthew, the man who gave her everything else. One evening, when Emma was older, she asked Matthew, "Daddy, you're not my real dad, right?" Matthew smiled softly. "Maybe not by blood," he said, "but by heart. I always have been." She grinned and hugged him. "That's what I thought." And in that moment, everything came full circle. The pain, the guilt, the heartbreak, all of it had led them here, to this quiet kind of happiness built not on perfection, but on forgiveness. Claire watched them together, realizing that love had survived after all. Not the kind of love that shouts or promises forever, but the kind that stays even when it has every reason to leave. Because some love stories aren't. about how they begin, they're about how they choose to stay.